be very interested in shortly, especially if you're compliance driven, and who isn't, is this thing called Cloud Controls Matrix Tool. And what this team did is they took the CSA guidance and they mapped the control objectives of all the 13 domains, and then they took they took five of the most heavily used regulatory compliance frameworks: COVID, PCI, HIPAA, ISO 27002, and NIST 800-53, kind of a smattering across industry. And they map the control objectives to each single one of these things. So what's interesting is you can kind of then use this tool in conjunction with guidance, both as a provider or a consumer, to understand, or get your auditors to understand, how each of the requirements in these compliance frameworks maps to the CSA guidance, which will in turn map to compensating controls or things that you can do as part of your risk assessment framework. It's going to be very, very useful. There was some licensing issues that are, I think, resolved now in the next couple of weeks. This will be made available to you. Be very, very useful. We're using it in another project called Cloud Audit, where we're using the same mapping to a namespace that will allow cloud providers to automate a lot of the data gathering capabilities for you as a consumer or auditors. But this is something that I think all of you should, if you haven't downloaded the guidance, you should definitely go get when it's available, because it's going to be very, very useful for you if you have to talk to auditors. And again, who doesn't? So we also have this thing called the Trusted Cloud Initiative. I'm doing for 10. 10 minutes, okay, good. Trusted Cloud Initiative. It's really kind of the cloud stamp of approval, if you want to look at it that way. Talk about the responsibilities for and frameworks for federation, especially in the space of identity, which is enormous as it relates to cloud. But it's been enormous for 20 years. Cloud computing acts as a fantastic forcing function now. When you think about that top-ranked threat, about I'm worried about the safety of my data, it really amplifies the refocusing of what it is we're supposed to be doing, which is, hey, I got to protect my content information, regardless of where it is being stored or executed. So how do I do that best? So you see a resurgence of a bunch of stuff, including identity management and authentication, which is going to kind of come back into vogue like bell bottoms. Right? It's going to be very important. Get together with a bunch of existing standards so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and build some proof of concepts, and ultimately arriving at what is defined as kind of certification seal. Hopefully it does not include the words like hacker safe or something like that, because that would be a darn shame. But it will at least talk about the fact that certain requirements have been met, and that the cloud providers themselves understand, and give you the capability to implement some of this stuff. There's also this thing called the Consensus Assessments Initiative. And it's being pulled together in a meeting, I think in May, say that? No, yeah. In Chicago by BMA and a bunch of other financials. They talk about, have you heard of the BITS shared assessments in finance? So they have, so for those of you who haven't, it's just a bunch of, it's a way of getting together and agreeing on a bunch of questions you're going to ask. That's a really lousy way of summarizing it, but it's the best I got right now. And essentially what they want to do is provide the same sets of capabilities for cloud providers. Shouldn't be that much of a left-hand turn, because if you ask an outsourced or service provider A, B, and C that deals with your data and provides you service, not too much different. They want to be able to capture the things that are potentially unique to cloud computing. And this will be kind of, this will be interesting. I should be attending this too, because what's important here is that you have to have a common set of information that you gather to support those questions being answered. And in many cases, cloud consumers are exercising their right to audit clauses with cloud providers, and they're hammering them. Because they hand them a 600-page document and laugh, right? And they go, ha ha ha. The cloud provider has to hire some 15-year-old kid to sit there and write, sorry, my daughter's 14, so sorry. 14-year-old kid. But they'd sit there and check off things, saying, yeah, right. Or they hold up this thing called a SAS 70 and say, see, we must be good. Clearly not enough. This is going to be interesting. I think it'll mesh really well with the CSA guidance, as well as the stuff we're doing in cloudaudit.org, which is actually gathering all that same amount of data or providing a namespace and common interface to allow a provider to automate gathering that data, putting it in a namespace that allows tools to actually reach out and collect that data. My goal is ultimately, and I don't usually say this publicly because people get bumped up, but my goal is actually to put auditors out of the data collection business and put them back into the auditing business. They spend an awful lot of money and time and energy essentially going out and collecting data and not enough time doing stuff with it. And so I think this will be very interesting, a way of getting a common set of assurance as well as a common set of data to collect, which kind of dovetails into this other project, the Cloud Metrics project, which talks about developing metrics for how you deal with things like GRC, encryption, key management, IDM, well, pretty much anything, really. I mean, these are just technology elements. Ultimately, I think trying to understand and capture and measure things that are difficult to quantify within the perspective of what we do in operational environments inside our enterprise become even more difficult when you have this level of abstraction where you don't even understand, just based on the definition of service, what is going on under the covers. So we need a lot more transparency and visibility into some of these processes, which will give people a lot more calm about what's happening to their data, what's happening to their information and applications. So, in summary, the issues with assurance in cloud environments, public or private, really talk about that we're product rich but solution poor, if that makes any sense. We've got a lot of great raw technology that needs to be adapted for use cases and operational models in cloud computing, given the changes in abstraction, what happens in compute, network, and storage. So it's not like we don't know what we have to do. It's not like we don't know how to do it. It's just getting essentially a lot of these roadmaps from vendors, and I work for one, so I can attest to how difficult this can be. When you have roadmaps that go out 4+ years, and you're looking at something as disruptive as virtualization or cloud, it's very difficult to take that notion of physical appliances and adapt them to virtual appliances and adapt them to virtual appliances at scale and still get the same performance, security, efficacy. So a lot of this stuff is really how do we adapt the controls in our operational models around going from physical to virtual. Right? That's the biggest issues here aren't technical; they're operational and cultural and managerial. And that's the biggest thing we learned when we started to see what virtualization was doing to our enterprise. Same thing's going on with cloud. The issues with geographical location and jurisdiction, like for example, you've probably heard the analogy about how German cardholder data cannot leave the physical confines of Germany. So if you want to use Amazon in Germany and there's no data center in Germany, right? So, or better yet, when there is, you want to constrain it to Germany. How do we do that? So there's some really interesting things going on now with trusted computing, using TPMs, which is the Trusted Platform Modules, which can actually assert with cryptographic capabilities the fact that not only, for example, is this a trusted environment, but that this particular workload happens to be running on this CPU, which by the way has been assured or asserted by this provider that this is in Germany. Very useful stuff. Let alone all the rest of the good stuff that comes with it. But there's a lot of cool things that are happening there. Those channels with provider transparency, this will also help there, as well as things like cloud audit, the metrics, the shared assessments. A lot of the tools, research, and standards are really a challenge because in many cases you're dealing with branches of either open source code that doesn't have to be branched off in support of the virtualization layers, for example, that power a lot of these clouds because they're offered not as software but as a service, so you don't know what's changed. Or on the other flip side of it, you have proprietary code that you don't have access to, that in many cases, as terms of contract of the end user licensing agreement, you can't actually reverse engineer. So a lot of the stuff that we see talking about things like research and vulnerability research on virtualization and cloud platforms is actually very hard to do unless you're willing to potentially go to jail or be sued. So you see a lot of effort being focused on open source platforms, which are good, but if the majority of 90% of the enterprise isn't running that, or the platforms that they might use aren't running that, while it talks about things that are interesting, they may not necessarily be applicable to that platform. So there's some very interesting things going on about how we're going to see what research and tool sets evolve, short of just kind of generic attack and research tools that we're used to seeing. But platform-specific things are being very interesting to think about when you are looking at